All right, so the objective of this presentation is not only to provide you with a better understanding of what dignity of choice is and why it's important, but also to look at the risk mitigation strategies and strategic planning, person-centered planning that help comprise it. Additionally, to understanding what informed choice is and the role it plays within the dignity of choice. We're also going to take a look at what role dignity of choice plays in person-centered planning, as well as the REM system. Next slide, please. So before we get started, we're going to try something new here. I don't know that we've ever done a poll question before in one of these webinars, so I'm sure it'll go smashingly. But we're going to try that out. And with that, if you would, please choose a statement that's kind of closest to how you think about issues of health, safety, and risk for people with disabilities and older adults. Your 5 choices here are going to be, it's my job to keep people safe. I start there and then see what choices people can have. Number 2, I support people making choices with a range of safe and healthy choices. Number 3, a person's choice should usually be supported unless it puts them at risk of serious harm. Number 4, people should have the opportunity to try things, but they should not be supported to do something that is not good for them. And number 5, finally, people should be supported to explore and act upon new potentially risky choices, even if there are bad consequences involved. So if you would, please choose, again, the one that's closest to how you think about issues of health, safety, and risk for persons with disabilities and older adults. I'm going to give a little time for these answers to come in, and then we will move on. I really pushed for the Jeopardy music to be played here, but we couldn't make that happen. That wasn't within our technological abilities. I'll go ahead and note also that these were adapted from the National Center of Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems, or the NCAPPS, finding the balanced webinar from the December 19 presentation they used. So we kind of borrowed this. I'm seeing in the chat box you guys are having trouble hearing me. Is that a concern here? Teresa, can you give me a check on that?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I was just looking in the chat box and it said they were having trouble hearing me. So if that was the case, I can always be louder.
I'm good. If you are having a hard time hearing Jason still, please put that in the chat box. I think the panelists, we can hear him, but if you all can't, please let us know.
All right. So we've given enough time now, and it looks like overwhelmingly people have gone with no answer. So we did have some people that selected E, looks like 26 of the 175. And then a couple people that went with D, 19 people that went with C, and looks like 8 people went with B, and we had 3 people go with the selection A. So for 1 we had 3, for 2 we had 8, for 3 we had 19. 2, looks like most people have rested on. People think people should be supported to explore and act upon new, potentially and risky choices, even if they are bad, if there are bad consequences involved, which is pretty good to start out with. It's like you guys might have known what was coming. So with that, we're going to head into the person-centered planning, and to do that, I'm going to transition over to Deanna Barkham.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. So person-centered planning is an individual-directed process, including others chosen by the individual to contribute to that process. This is a positive approach to the planning and coordination of services and supports based on the individual's aspirations, needs, preferences, and values that reflect individual preferences and goals. The goal of person-centered planning is to create a plan that optimizes the person's self-defined quality of life, choice, control, and self-determination through meaningful exploration and discovery of unique preferences, needs, and wants. Some components of person-centered planning are person-centered thinking. So that's keeping the person at the forefront when planning for services and supports or any life decisions. Using language that reflects the person first and makes the person feel valued and respected. Using person-centered tools to identify what's important to the person, what's important for the person, and what's working and not working in their lives. Creating person-centered outcomes and goals so that the person's goals drive the services that they need. The outcomes should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to the person, and time-bound. Next slide, please. An example of a person-centered planning is Martin's story. So during the person-centered planning process, Martin has identified a goal to ride his bike to the park alone. Martin and his mom are apprehensive about risks associated with this goal. Martin's support coordinator listens to Martin's desires and concerns and asks follow-up questions to better understand. Martin wants to ride his bike alone to be more independent. Martin is nervous about losing his way, and his mom is worried about him having an accident. Martin's support coordinator should review the risks with the goals and together create strategies to mitigate those risks. So examples of conversations that the support coordinator would have around risks are one, losing your way. So you could say, how would you feel about your mom or your support worker riding beside you for the first time? Along the way, they could point out markers such as signs and stores, and that would show you where to turn. Can you think of other things that would be helpful to get you to the park? Another risk is being unsteady on his bike. So are there times of the day when you feel less dizzy? There are laws that require helmets to be worn to ride your bike, so this would protect your head, but what do you think about wearing knee pads when you ride your bike? The risk of a flat tire. Could you maybe bring your cell phone with you to the park? If you have any issues with your bike, could you call your mom and support worker? We could also set a timer on your phone so that when the timer goes off, you would know it's time to start back home. So the support coordinator could discuss additional emergency scenarios, such as getting hit by a car or being approached with someone maybe looking to take advantage of him. Although there's a variety of possible scenarios to discuss, Martin and his support coordinator identifies the scenarios that Martin is most concerned with, and they identify mitigation strategies for those risks. The support coordinator should actively engage Martin during the discussion. And then after the risks have been discussed, the support coordinator confirms that Martin's still interested in the activity. That is informed consent. Identifying the goal, identifying and understanding the risks, and still choosing to pursue that goal. So if he chooses to continue with this goal, Martin, his mom, and the support coordinator, and any other natural supports that he identifies, should discuss how each person will support this goal, including ways that his mom can help in supported decision-making. The support coordinator should maintain an open dialogue with Martin after the support planning process, and they can reevaluate those goals as needed. Even through risk mitigation, there is a possibility that an accident will happen. For example, a possible reportable event would be Martin has a bike wreck at the park and a bystander calls 911. The police and EMT arrive at the park. Martin receives treatment in the ER. His mom comes to the ER to meet him and pick him up. The situation is reportable because Martin received treatment at the ER. There are some risks that cannot be avoided, and a reportable event may be required in some situations. However, the team planned ahead to mitigate as many risks as possible. Okay, next slide.
Thank you, Dana. And this would be where Tracy came in to explain to what Disney Choice is, but I'll go ahead and kick that off. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Disney Choice. If you go to the next slide, please. All right, so some things to keep in mind. People need to be able to make choices. And so overprotection, it might seem kind, but it might smother a person as well. They need to be able to make some of their own decisions. They need to be able to make some of their own mistakes. It's often said that, you know, mistakes are the greatest learning tool. And so letting people to try things that may seem risky or scary for parents or professionals is important for growth as an individual. So dignity of risk allows people to get out and get out of their comfort zones and try new things. So an example of this might be moving to a new city or state, being able to make choices and live in the consequences of choices that promote self-determination and high expectation. And so some of the things to potentially look at are some of the questions you can see in front of you. So for example, there's a number of on these. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but what if you could do part of your grocery shopping but weren't allowed to do any because you weren't able to do all of the shopping, which I can completely relate to, as my wife will not let me do grocery shopping. So what if you never got to make a mistake? What if you had no privacy? What if you got in trouble and sent away and you couldn't come back because always remember your trouble? So these are things that you really need to consider when you're taking a look at it and putting yourself into somebody else's shoes, into the shoes of a person supported. So what if you never got to make a decision? So just some things to take into consideration. And finally, next slide, please. What if you never got a chance? And that's an important question that a lot of person supported have to deal with. Am I going to get a chance? Am I going to be able to be my own advocate? Am I going to be able to make decisions that affect my daily outcomes? So what if you never got a chance? Next slide, please. So this is Raphael's story. Raphael utilizes an argumentative and alternative communication device, augmentative and alternative communication device to communicate with the assistance of his direct support professionals. Raphael expresses a desire to attend job fair and other activities, and the planning is going to probably include discussing those potential risks, talking through different scenarios for risk mitigation, and pre-programmed questions and answers that might be discussed at the job fair. He's going to bring his resume. He's going to create a short video showcasing his skills. And then finally, he's going to post job fair discussion. And so direct support professionals play a key role in promoting DOC with the person supported. Their actions, their attitudes toward the goal of achievement directly affects outcomes with the ability of the person supported in achieving a more individual freedom. So if the DSP rather is an example, chose not to assist Raphael and instead told him to go to the job fair, or that him going to the job fair would not end well, Raphael had no chance to ever be, of bettering himself or trying to use language and would result in him suffering some sort of mental anguish as being told that. So it would not meet the criteria necessarily for emotional abuse. But so this fits in with the dignity of choice. It emphasizes his goal and how ET works with him. Raphael has a disability, but he's not going to let that define him, and he wants to better himself. He wants to go out and get a job, and he wants assistance to do that. And so certainly he should have the support necessary to make sure that's possible. Next slide, please. So principle of the dignity of choice is going to be taken over by Erica, and I will give it to her now. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Jason. So,
Okay.
dignity of choice is a person's right to make informed decisions, to engage in experiences which are necessary for personal growth and development. So, supporting a person's dignity of choice means honoring his or her right to make choices and participate in activities that may involve taking risks. So, assisting the person to identify, consider, and mitigate negative consequences that may result from his or her choices is essential to supporting a person's dignity of choice. So, another component of dignity of choice is dignity of risk, which is the belief that a person's right to take risks is necessary for dignity, for self esteem, and should not be impeded by others due to concerns about their responsibility of ensuring the person's health and welfare and safety. So, as indicated earlier in the presentation, a helpful way to understand dignity of choice and the role of a person's support network is to reflect on decisions you have made, risks you have taken, and lessons you have learned in making those choices and taking those risks. Just because a person receives services does not mean they should not have the same opportunities to take risks and learn from experiences as someone who does not receive services. So, dignity of choice, person-centered thinking, and promoting self-determination are key components of service delivery system transformation. These values promote autonomy, decision-making, and opportunities for people supported by LTSS programs to achieve their maximum potential and experience the life they choose. So, supporting dignity of choice involves understanding that taking risks is part of experiencing life, honoring the person's right to make informed decisions to take risks, and assisting the person to identify and mitigate potential negative consequences of his or her choices. And I believe I'm going to bring it back to Jason.
Thank you, Erica. So, next slide, please. We're going to talk about Carla. Carla is near and dear to my heart as a reformed smoker. So let's talk about Carla. Carla is a smoker. She's picked up the habit as a teenager, has been smoking her entire adult life. Carla has no plans on quitting smoking cigarettes, even after being provided with information on smoking cessation programs. During her PCSP planning process, she makes it known to her support coordinator and others that she plans on continuing to smoke. And so despite her diagnosis of COPD, which ultimately is her decision to make and should be respected. So Carla utilizes supplemental oxygen at night to help maintain a healthy oxygen saturation level. And as the oxygen source is highly flammable, this obviously presents a significant risk to Carla and to her staff. Carla has been explained the dangers of smoking, and her and her care coordinator has acknowledged that Carla does have the capacity to understand the risk of continuing to smoke, especially as it relates to the use of the supplemental oxygen. Next slide, please. So Carla and her care coordinator discussed the dangers of smoking near the oxygen source in detail, noting that the danger is not only to herself, but that is also a danger to others. And Carla has demonstrated that she understands the potential danger to herself and others, and to help mitigate those risks, Carla agrees that she will not smoke in her home and that no smoking signs will be posted around the home and the oxygen source. So to ensure that she's making an informed choice, Carla has been provided ample information regarding the dangers of smoking, as well as the dangers of smoking near her oxygen source. After exhibiting that she was able to understand these dangers and mitigation strategies were put in place to decrease the risk of harm that this poses both to herself and to others. So in doing so, Carla has exercised her dignity of choice in choosing to continue to smoke and agreed to do so in a manner that does not place herself and others at a probable risk of serious harm. This information was incorporated into her PCSP to ensure that the information was captured in her plans of care. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about informed choice, and I'm going to shoot it back to Erica to do so.
Thank you. So, informed choice means that the person has been provided with sufficient information to make an educated and voluntary decision to move forward with his or her desired goal or activity. This process involves meaningful discussions with the person about considering the benefits, the risks, and potential outcomes that may result. So for a person to make an informed choice, he or she must understand how the identified risks could be mitigated. I believe the next one goes to Jamie.
Hey there, we're going to talk about Valerie. Valerie is meeting with her care coordinator during their regularly scheduled PCSP review meeting. Valerie's lived in her home for the past 30 years, and she receives Choice's personal care visits to help her with activities of daily living. Valerie's recently started to demonstrate early signs of dementia, of which her doctors, provider, and care coordinator are all actively monitoring. During their meeting, the care coordinator observes Valerie stumble over the corner of a throw rug. The care coordinator mentions her concern about the rug being a fall risk and suggests removing the rug. During this conversation, Valerie becomes agitated at the suggestion and informs the care coordinator that she's had that rug in her living room for the past 30 years and never once has she fallen because of it, and she doesn't plan on falling in the future. The care coordinator suggests the alternative of tapping down the rug corner that is raised, and again, Valerie angrily dismisses her suggestion. So the care coordinator continues to note that fall risk on Valerie's PCSP and that Valerie is not willing to explore risk mitigation strategies at this time. The care coordinator makes an internal case management note to revisit the idea of tapping down the rug corner at their next meeting and to approach that conversation differently. Next slide, please. Before the next person-centered support plan meeting, Valerie's daughter calls the care coordinator. Valerie has given permission for the care coordinator and her daughter to talk about Valerie's health care. Oh, go back to that previous slide, please. Sorry, thank you. To talk about Valerie's health care and needs and preferences, and says that Valerie went out for errands this week but had trouble remembering how to get home. When visiting need to go back one. Sorry. When visiting Valerie on another occasion, the care coordinator notices that Valerie's pill box is unopened and she has not taken her medications. So the first concern is that Valerie's daughter recommends that she and the care coordinator work towards nursing home placement for Valerie. The solution there is that the care coordinator can listen thoughtfully to Valerie's daughter, understanding her concerns. One major concern there is that Valerie is opposed to moving. The care coordinator can recommend strategies to support Valerie in her home, such as adding increased personal care hours to maintain her mother's assistance at home rather than nursing home placement, so that Valerie may stay as independent as possible. The second concern is that Valerie may need additional support when she's out running errands. The solution there is she may be able to explore online grocery shopping with delivery or decision aid for Valerie when she needs assistance. The care coordinator may recommend an electronic or automated medication dispenser to prompt Valerie when it's time for medication. So the goal here is that, together they can explore, so Valerie, her daughter, and the care coordinator can explore options to support Valerie's unique needs so that she can continue living as independently as possible.
The person should be supported and involved in goal setting, risk identification, and mitigation to the extent possible. So we shouldn't presume that a person with a proxy decision-making arrangement in place doesn't have the ability to participate in the process. So it's important to note that risk management processes must use all strategies available to empower the individual to make his or her own informed decisions regarding tolerable risk. Next slide. Thank you. So a way for a person with a disability to make his or her own decisions by using friends, family members, professionals, and other people he or she trusts to help understand the issues and the choices, so they can ask questions and receive explanations in language that he or she understands and communicate their decisions to others. So there is a website here that I'm going to put in the chat box for you that is a great resource tool. And what it does is it provides lists of resources and decision-making experiences from people who are self-advocates and their families in Tennessee. So it's a great source to use. And then it's Diana.
All right. So an example of supported decision-making we can see in Nikki's story. Nikki is a 20-year-old young woman with a disability who needs support with making some decisions. Nikki's mother is her conservator. Nikki spends much of her time online talking with a classmate that Nikki would describe as a love interest. Nikki's mother is less excited about the growing relationship and would prefer Nikki to spend her time focusing on school and her part-time work. Nikki's mother is concerned that Nikki's interest will lead to heartbreak, declining grades, and/or a sexual relationship that Nikki's mother would feel is inappropriate for someone with a disability. During the PCSP meeting, Nikki's support coordinator asked Nikki about her goals. Nikki wants to continue with school and her job, and also says, I really want Andre to be my boyfriend. He asked me to meet him at the movie theater, but my mom said no. The support coordinator is aware of Nikki's mother's role as both a parent and a conservator, but also wishes to empower Nikki and respect her wishes. So Nikki's support coordinator may engage Nikki and her mother to better understand their respective wishes and concerns. Most parents experience apprehension when a child grows older and wishes to experience life as an adult. Additionally, we consider the past experiences. Nikki may have experienced challenges with balancing responsibilities and time management in the past. She may have experienced unrequited love, and Nikki's mother hopes to guard her against that in the future. However, Nikki may have developed additional skills or has matured and is better equipped to navigate new experiences at this point in her life. And learning to balance responsibilities and experience love and companionship is a natural part of the developmental process. While respecting the role of the mother and conservator, the support coordinator may explore risk mitigation strategies that account for both Nikki and the mother's wishes. The support coordinator may guide a conversation about time management and balancing the responsibilities of work, school, and friends. She may also discuss appropriate boundaries, expectations, and decision-making in romantic relationships. Also explore proactive measures to avoid pregnancy or sexually transmitted diseases should Nikki choose to explore a physical relationship. The support coordinator and mother may jointly address these topics with Nikki to ensure that she is informed and educated on potential risks. Should Nikki wish to move forward after hearing both the positive and negative potential outcomes, Nikki, her mother, and the support coordinator can discuss next steps. While Nikki and her mother may have differing thoughts on the risks that are tolerable, the risk mitigation plan should address strategies that balance concerns and wishes. For example, one next step might be a weekend group outing with Andre, Nikki, and some other friends while Andre and Nikki get to know each other better. The risk mitigation plan can be adjusted over time as confidence is built. As trust develops over time, the support coordinator may discuss the conservatorship in more detail with Nikki's mother. Perhaps Nikki has developed additional skills and independence, and the conservatorship is no longer needed. The support coordinator can discuss options, such as having Nikki's rights restored, while Nikki's mother provides decision-making supports for just those topics where Nikki needs additional support.
So the Successful Citizen Focus Group series is intended to ensure folks have the opportunity to know things to do in order to increase the likelihood of being successful and a valued community member. So the assumptions upon which the Successful Citizen Project was based upon is that every person wants to be successful. And in any moment, each person is doing the best he or she can based on what he or she knows. And people who don't know what is best to do will probably do something else. So we kind of look at this in two categories, the rights and privileges of citizenship, and then the associated duties and responsibilities with that. So rights to consider would be the right to vote, and there's an obligation to be informed, the right to one's own view and opinions, There's that obligation to respect others' views and others' beliefs. The right to worship as you believe. With that comes the obligation to respect others' rights to worship as they believe. The right to protection under law comes with the obligation to cooperate with police and firefighters and obey the law. The right to live in community. There's that obligation to be a good neighbor and treat others with respect and consideration. And the right to go where you want to go. You have that obligation to follow the rules of where you want to go, of the places that you go to. And the right to choose your friends. You have that obligation to be a good friend. And back to Diana.
Next slide. So person-centered risk management. The first step in person-centered risk management process is identifying the individual's preferred lifestyle and vision for a meaningful life. This really includes prioritized goals, choices, and preferences that are unique to that person, encouraging and supporting the individual to have high expectations and avoid dismissing goals and desires based on limiting assumptions about what is possible. Appropriate risk identification focuses on individuals' current situations and the risks relevant to the person's situation. We identify these risks through comprehensive assessment and the person-centered support planning process. Very important, we do not expect every possible risk to be identified in the PCSP planning process. Next slide. Although there will be some changes to the PCSP on 10.1, risk will still be included as an important piece. Risks are identified through the primary question, risks I need help with include. And they consider risk associated with the person's goals or choices. The secondary questions drill down to determine supports the person needs with those risks by answering questions such as, who will be responsible for helping me mitigate this risk? What will this help look like? When will I receive this help? What will the follow-up to my risk plan look like? What's been tried? Was it successful? And then explain and describe how my risk plan will change. Next slide. Back one. So as far as how risks relate to dignity of choice, in making life choices, potential risks inevitably arise. In adopting a commitment to honoring the dignity of choice, it is critically important to approach risk without an assumption that all risk-taking is bad. Risks are inevitable in a life that involves new opportunities for personal growth, independence, learning, relationship building, employment, and other life experiences. The take-home point here is risks are inherent in everything we do.
So let's look at Alonzo's story. Alonzo experienced a serious accident which resulted in a significant physical disability. He does use a wheelchair now. As a result of this, he is also taking medication as he is suffering from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. He does love baseball, and so Alonzo likes to use his wheelchair and travel 2 blocks to the field so he can watch the local games. Unfortunately, one time during a game, he had an emotional reaction to fireworks. He was upset, he started crying, and people around him really didn't know how to help him. He was quite embarrassed. And so at that point, he did not want to go back. He felt like he lost his connection to his friends. He felt very embarrassed, and he really didn't know where to go from that point. So together with his care coordinator, they discussed opportunities to talk to a doctor, to talk about other treatment options, maybe a therapy, maybe not the medication, coping mechanisms for when those things happen. She can also be, or he or she can be invited to go with him for the PCSP visits with the doctor and really discuss those alternatives and how to go ahead and look at those risks. Because as we're looking for a risk with the dignity of choice and person-centered, you want to look at every aspect, because it should not have to be where an individual is not able to attend those. So during the meeting, Alonzo may talk about, what is it that he anticipates? What if something happens? Check the weather. If it's going to be a bad weather, maybe not go to that ball game that day. Go ahead and put those things in place to really set him up for success. And so as we look at Alonzo, we really want to make sure that he is connected with the coordinator that he has. He's connected with those outside entities to be able to problem solve. And as we look as reportable event, as we replace it back again, and we go back to it, how does this really relate to reportable event management? One responsibility of the coordinator is to be able to talk about those things with Alonzo. What precipitates that? What are his goals? How do we achieve those? Not to give up on the goals because you may have had a mild onset. As we look as a negative for the reportable event management is that what if that care coordinator, did not want to participate? What if, they did discuss the medications? What if he did stop the medication and it got worse? So those are those things. What if the DSP that he works with at home didn't encourage him, does not set them up for success, or even so belittles him and is insultive? And so those are those things we want to look at reportable event, really with the reportable event management process as we're looking at the risk, to have that individual be able to make those decisions. But if something does happen, does it meet the criteria? Do we need to go ahead and look at it? Because again, reportable management is to look at, to reduce reoccurrences, to look at really the core of what happened and a breakdown on whether it was communication, whether it was disrespect, whether it was, went to the level of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And how do we prevent that in the future? I'll hand it over to Jamie.
So we're going to talk about tolerable risks and dignity of choice. Tolerable risks are those risks an individual is willing to accept or take, given their goals, choices, and preferences, and the risk mitigation strategies that can be applied to avoid potential negative outcomes and consequences. Effective risk management processes allow an individual to make an informed decision about which risks are tolerable. However, some risks may be too great to be considered tolerable by the individual, such as risks with a high probability of death or serious injury. And then on the flip side, other risks are considered part of everyday life. Risks with the possibility of minor injury, negative reaction from peers, or failure on the first try. Discussion and consideration of specific risks should always balance identifying the potential benefits with the potential harm instead of only focusing on the potential harm that may result from taking a specific risk. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit more about risk mitigation, management, and supported decision making. Risk mitigation does not attempt to eliminate all risk from an individual's life. Such an approach does not recognize that a risk is a natural part of life that cannot be eradicated. There's risk in both action and inaction, in choosing to do something and not choosing to do something. The discussion of risk and mitigation should focus on the individual's strengths, desires, skills, and abilities. When we're talking about identification of risks, how are risks identified? They can be identified through interviews. The care or support coordinator is to engage in conversations about risk with that individual and anyone else he or she chooses to include in the person-centered planning and risk assessment process. That includes but doesn't limit family members, natural supports, and paid caregivers. You can also identify risks through observation. Through observing the supported person's behaviors or their interactions with their environment, family, friends, peers, or paid caregivers. You can identify risks through a review of records. That record review that's part of the PCSP process. And that includes, but doesn't limit, the comprehensive assessment, medical records, school records, behavioral plans, and pre-assessment evaluations, or PAEs. You can identify risks through expert advice, through conversations with professionals that support the individual. And that includes, doesn't limit, the PCP, psychiatrists, psychologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and behavioral therapists. Safety is an important consideration in the decision-making process. However, it must be reasonably balanced with an individual's choices, desires, preferences, and needs tied to their ultimate happiness and satisfaction. With proper risk management process, the individual's rights, choices, preferences, and values can be respected, all while maximizing the individual's safety and well-being. Only after the individual understands how the identified risks are being mitigated can they truly make an informed decision about whether a particular risk is a tolerable risk that they wish to accept or take. For informed choice, all risk mitigation should be person-centered, utilizing individualized supports to offer innovative solutions, least restrictive settings and practices. Also, all efforts to identify risk mitigation strategies involve developing flexible but prudent strategies and promote positive risk-taking and ensuring reasonable efforts to prevent the potential negative impact of specific risks the individual wishes to accept or take. Risk mitigation plans may include an identified goal, choice, or preference, potential positive outcomes, potential negative outcomes, tolerable and intolerable, the impact of actions toward the pursuit of the goal, actions to address the intolerable risk, responsible parties, actions timeline, what successful risk mitigation will look like for the supported person, documented progress towards goals, and possible multiple plans in place. It's important to note that not all plans will include every step or component outlined above. So who's responsible? The individuals identified in the risk mitigation plan as being responsible for implementing outlined actions must be knowledgeable, trained, and competent in order to appropriately follow through the risk mitigation strategies. Updating the risk mitigation plan, expectations of keeping the risk mitigation plan current, relevant, and effective include that the risk and mitigation must be reassessed during the person-centered planning process and may be reassessed as new skills are learned or goals are accomplished or changed. When new services are added or existing services are changed, when significant changes in needs, condition, or circumstances occur, after critical incidents or reportable events occur, and or when requested by the person supported or their natural support. If a new risk is identified, the severity and likelihood of a risk occurring has changed, or if early strategies to mitigate the risk have been unsuccessful or no longer applicable, the process of risk assessment and mitigation planning begins again and is documented in the PCSP. An important note about risk mitigation planning, agencies and individual staff persons who provide home and community-based services in choices and/or ECF choices are accountable for ensuring the supports are provided in accordance with each individual's PCSP, including implementation of strategies identified to help mitigate risks. However, they should not be held responsible if, in spite of appropriate supports and implementation of appropriate and reasonable risk mitigation strategies, an untoward event occurs. The PCSP is not designed to cover all possible risks or choices. And so we really need to look at, reported versus investigated. And I believe moving on to Liz.
Sure, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Terry and his story. So Terry is a person who has IDD and he has some physical health needs, and he engages in personal support for many of his activities through his day. So he really wants to live on an apartment on his own, but his family and his workers think that it might be challenging for him, so they're hesitant about it. Previously, Terry had received 24-hour support, and he never had the opportunity to stay alone. So there's some things that they brought to the table about what the family and the worker had concerns for Terry. They had concerns about, like, what if there was a fire? What if he had trouble making friends where he lived, or if he lost his job and couldn't afford it anymore? And they wanted to know how he would take care of his dog by himself. Whereas Terry had his own concerns. He was concerned about his family and his worker, about how they would feel about this, if they would support what he wanted to do, and would they be mad at him for moving out on his own? So there are some strategies that Terry and his support coordinator could do to work together to address his needs. They could work together on his PCSP. They could look at his budget. They could work on strategies to address the concerns that everybody has, so everybody could feel like there was a strategy in place in case there was a fire, and how to handle the dog. They talked about ideas of job support, on the job support, how he could use his job coach, and how to initiate conversations with his family and his workers. Nora, if you could move 2 slides. So during this process, what would be important is for Terry to share his concerns and to seek support as well during the transition. And it's important that he tells people how he's feeling and what's going on. For example, Terry might have told it that he said his family might visit once a week. He may say that he values his relationships and that he needs support when he's living alone with preparing meals. So if Terry makes sure that he keeps the conversations open with his support coordinator and his family, he'll be able to feel more empowered with his decision, and everybody will feel comfortable and have a better idea on how to support him. Jason?
All right, is that the end of your presentation? Oh. Okay, y'all, we have a half an hour left, so I want to kind of try to move quickly. Is there anything else in these last few slides that we need to get to? And I don't know whose slides they are.
We do. Hey, Teresa, this is Shannon. So we still have several slides left going over the reportable event. We want to go through these as we have examples of examples that relate to reportable events. So this is Jason's slide.
Okay, so we'll let Jason run through, because I know people are dropping off, and I just want to try to get through this quickly. Thank you, Shannon.
You're welcome.
Jason, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
I was double muted. I apologize.
Thank you.
Let me go through these examples real quick with you guys. If you go ahead and move to the next slide, and we're going to be talking about person-supported Cliff. Yes. So person-supported Cliff, he's expressed that he wants a support coordinator. He's talked with him and decided he wanted more independence. He'd like to learn how to cook his own meals after discussing that risk mitigation strategy. And doing some strategic planning. A plan was put in place for him to start preparing his own meals. After implementation of that plan, Cliff began preparing dinner one evening, and the staff supervising him was getting the ingredients together for his meal. Well, so happens that Cliff left a dish towel near the burner and ended up causing fire with a little bit of minimal smoke damage to the kitchen. So in this example, the staff's failure to adhere to those requirements of the PCSP would be reportable despite the risk mitigation strategies and strategic planning that an untoward event did occur, in which the staff could be held responsible, as they ended up taking a phone call and stepping outside the smoke while he was cooking and failed to apply the appropriate level of supervision. So as a result of that, the staff being out, that would result in that being a reportable event, and that's going to be reported as a fire and an allegation of neglect for the staff failing to provide that supervision. We move to the next example, please. So same situation, Cliff expressed his interest to the support coordinator. He wants to do his own cooking. After implementation of that plan, he began prepared dinner one evening. The staff supervising him as he was getting some noodles cooked. While removing the pot, the staff advised Cliff to be careful dumping out the water. However, Cliff dumped the water out too fast, resulting in splashing and burning his hands. This would not be a reportable event other than the medical incident that was involved, because it's not the appropriate level of staff supervision was in there. And despite the risk mitigation strategies and strategic planning that went into developing this plan, we all know that an untoward event could occur, but there was no plan of cares that were violated in relation to that. All right. So with that, we're going to move down to the contacts list, and you'll see the resources on slide 49, Nora, please. So really quick, this is just the one that was mentioned, the resource that was mentioned earlier, the tndecisionmaking.org. There you're going to find some of the referrals for ideas that a person has the right to make decisions to the full extent of their own capacity, even as they get needed support. If you move down to the next slide, here's the key contacts for you. We'll have all these readily available for you once the presentation or this presentation's over. We'll make sure it's put it up on the website so you guys can get it, and it'll have other appropriate contacts for you. And I think that is going to wrap up our presentation. So I'm going to turn it back to Teresa.
Hey, Jason, I'm going to step back for just a second. And I missed the polling on the pulse check and how that went earlier. So we had a plan to do that question and polling again, and I didn't know if that was a planned skip of that slide or if we were going to do that.
Yeah, I think just for the purpose of time constraints, we've went ahead and moved past that one. And to be honest, the first round of that seemed to indicate that people had a pretty good idea of what the dignity of choice involved, because most of the answers were circled around being inclusive to those people's desires to gain some independence and understanding that risks are involved with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. That presentation was very detailed and very informative, and that will be up on the webpage, correct, Jason?
Correct. Yeah, that'll be up on the website here shortly.
Yep, I know there's a lot of information to take in a short period of time, so it will be available. And as always, any questions, you can send them into the REM mailbox. We're going to move on quickly to Vicki, and she's going to give us some training reminder, and then we can get to the Q&A. Vicki? Vicki, you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right. I apologize. So real quickly, we wanted to provide a grid for all the current training leading up to our go live. If you look at this real quickly, we'll have what the various training requirements are. And in the column that is highlighted in yellow, that's going to dictate to you the due dates and the timelines for that completion. If you'll notice that the yellow is going to be related to ECF choices, Katie Beckett, 1915C, ICF IID, and the choices members who choose to opt in the process early on rather than waiting to the final deadline. So this tells you all the training requirements and their due dates, and it's broken down in a grid format. It also includes the TQI, which is the provider investigator training through QUILT for those folks that have completed the provisional one-day knowledge-based training. They will be the first selected to attend their TQI training session of choice. And then all of those who do not complete the one-day provisional training, you will be provided those timelines that have space available. So first come, first serve, and then second would be those people that have chosen not to conduct the provisional training. And for those of you that like to look at things in a different type of format, we've also done it in a, scroll down, Nora, please. We have also provided the same kind of timeline in a more date-line calendar for you. So both of these will be posted. For those of you that receive our open line article, it'll be in our open line. It will also be on the web page following the presentation and the upload of the FAQs. Teresa?
Thank you, Vicki. Before we go on to the pre-submitted questions, I have two really quick things. First one is I want to be sure that my answer earlier to Ann's question about the LRA trained investigators was clear. Investigators who are LRA trained and have had the supplemental training but through DIDD that was provided a few months ago do not need to take the TQI training. However, LRA certified investigators who did not participate in or take advantage of the additional training will need to take the TQI training and be badged for competency. And other than that, I do want to thank the panelists who took part in the presentation real quickly. It was very informative. And I think for a lot of us who have been in the IDDD world for quite a few years now can really see how far and how much progression has occurred within the field. And it's come a long way, and it's very impressive to see presentations like that were given, and personal choice and person-centeredness really being on the forefront. So I do appreciate everyone who took part in that. Now, the first pre-submitted question is going to go to Leanne with blue. If I am a choices provider and have not signed up at all yet, how do I register for the provisional 1 day?
Okay. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. So how to sign up for the provisional 1 day. You'll need to complete the provider investigation registration form. I'm going to put the link in the chat box. And after you submit that, the background checks will be completed. And then after that, once they're all done, you'll move forward to the 1 day training. And once registration is complete, you'll get an email where you can choose your preferred date. And I think you're actually going to provide up to 3 dates, and then they'll do their best to get you into one of those.
All right. Thank you so much, Leanne.
Mhm.
Moving on to the next question, pre-submitted question. It jumps around, which is for Liz. If a supported person utilizes a seatbelt cover in the vehicle because they will remove their seatbelt while the van is moving, but does not have a formal BSP addressing this, does this require a ref? What if they have a cover on the PPD of their wheelchair as well to prevent them from unbuckling the buckle and falling? Is a ref required? Can this be a consolidated ref? Liz?
Sure. So if it is part of the design of the wheelchair or the vehicle to specifically meet the needs of the person supported, then a ref is not necessary as it's a part of their equipment design. If it is not part of the design of the wheelchair or the vehicle, then it should be addressed in a plan of care for it to be utilized. This is able to be reported by a consolidated ref because it's addressed in the plan of care. If it's not addressed in the plan of care as an appropriate response, then a ref would be required within 1 business day of the event.
Thank you, Liz. Next question is for you. If a person supported has a serious injury of known cause, i.e. due to a fall, a mobile x-ray has been done in the home and has identified a hairline fracture. The person is able to see the orthopedic doctor the next day and does not require treatment at the ER. Is this reportable?
So it's important to remember that all falls with injury are reportable, but a medical event is only reportable if medical treatment occurs at an emergency room or an urgent care. So when an intervention is utilized during a medical event that's not considered reportable by the definitions, the intervention will not be reportable. So in this case, the person did not get treatment at an ER or urgent care. So even though the intervention of an x-ray was used to diagnose a fracture, it would not be a reportable event, unless, of course, remembering if it was a fall, that's reportable, or something like a self-injurious behavior or alleged abuse or neglect. Obviously, those are things that are reportable.
Thank you, Liz. That was good clarification. Next question for you, Liz. If a person has a signed consent from their conservator for a long-standing psychotropic medication and the consent has expired, however, vigorous efforts to obtain an updated consent from the legal conservator have been unsuccessful. To discontinue the psychotropic medication would present serious risk of harm to the person supported. As a result, the medication continues while continuing efforts to obtain an updated consent from the conservator. This is technically administering the psychotropic without consent. Based on this criteria, it appears that this would be reportable. What should be done to protect the person supported who would be at risk of harm if the psychotropic medication is discontinued, especially if it is discontinued abruptly?
Sure. So you are correct that this is a reportable event. However, to address the continued administration without consent, you're going to need to discuss that with the Human Rights Committee.
Thank you, Liz. And that the Human Rights Committee would be applicable for the 1915C program, and the settings committees, I believe, would be the applicable group for the other programs.
Thank you.
Next question. We are an ICF IID. The people we support have a wide variety of medical diagnoses. if someone has a medical diagnosis of reflux disease and they have been receiving treatment for this for 3 years, would this have to also be identified as a chronic condition? Or would the fact that they have this diagnosis and are receiving daily treatment for it make it a chronic condition by default? Would it have to be listed both as a diagnosis and a chronic condition in the ISP?
Okay, so any chronic conditions should be identified as a chronic condition in their plan of care. Listing it as a chronic condition in the plan of care, that's what impacts if it's going to be reportable for you. So, for example, if reflux was documented as a chronic condition in the plan of care and the person supported ended up going to the ER and received treatment for their reflux, it would not be reportable based on the REM definition of reportable medical, which I'm going to remind you what that definition is. A medical event is reportable if medical treatment occurs during the delivery of services or is discovered during the delivery of services outside of a diagnosed chronic condition and requires treatment at the ER or urgent care. So remember that if you document it as a chronic condition in the plan of care, then it's not going to have to be reportable if they do get that treatment at the ER or urgent care.
Thank you, Liz. And that's it for you. And now we're going to move to Skylin or Leanne. When you speak of sending refs to MCOs, are you speaking of the insurance company of the individual, or is it related to the waiver, choices, etc., where the funding comes from? Skylin or Leanne?
Yeah, I can take that. So the reportable event form itself should be submitted to both the IDD and the MCO. So it's just easier just to copy the MCO when you're sending that on to the IDD. And the MCO should be identified in the person's ISP, so the individual support plan, or the PCSP, and also on the person's insurance card. If you're unable to find the information that's in the ISP or the PCSP, and you don't have a copy of the insurance card, you can always contact the person's independent support coordinator, the state case manager, the support coordinator, or the care coordinator to assist. And all of those people depend on which program the person's enrolled in. And again, the person's individual support plan or person-centered support plan would identify that person. So for an example, ICF, IDD programs, 1915C, the CAC, statewide provider or statewide waiver services, SD waiver supports, all of those programs, the person would have an ISP. And then for ECF choices and choices, those programs have PCSPs.
Thank you, Skylin. I think I'm going to hold you here for the next one.
Okay.
We only need to report to primary or secondary or both.
So for insurance purposes, I'm assuming the question is for, so just plain and simple, if you have to submit all reportable event forms, go to DIDD, AmeriGroup, Blue Care, and or United Healthcare, depending on which MCO the person is currently enrolled with. So any other insurance companies, they don't need a copy of the reportable event form.
Thank you, Skylin. Now moving to the chat box. There's just a few questions. Any questions specific to provider investigator registrations, we will answer directly to the person who has asked the question. If that's not occurred, then it will be occurring shortly after the WebEx. Now, Tracy, I think, is Tracy on the call still? Yeah. Hey, Tracy, I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but I know that I definitely don't know. Maybe being a nurse, you would know. If a person uses a wheelchair safety harness to prevent her from falling forward, there's a question about whether or not the safety harness is a part of the wheelchair, part of the wheelchair design. Would you know how to answer that, Tracy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we did cover that. If the wheelchair is part of it, and that's part of the structure of it that has a safety harness in it, which some of them are, that is not a reportable event. If some type of restraint is put on that wheelchair that is outside of what is considered part of the wheelchair, if it's not a safety harness as part of it, if they're using something outside of something that is particularly for that wheelchair, then that is not something that you can use. You really want to be able to look at the PCS plan, to look at the plan take it to the settings committee if you are affiliated with one of the MCOs to make sure that this is appropriate. For one thing, you're looking at safety. If we're using something outside of manufacturer's safety harnesses, could really cause damage if there was an accident. Second of all, we want to make sure that that individual is be able to move around as they need to in transit. And so it's really important not to be able just to use anything at all. But no, if you're using something as part of the wheelchair, as part of the plan, that would not be a reportable event. It is outside of that. If someone has used a regular wheelchair and all of a sudden was struggling with behaviors, and they say took a blanket and wrapped it around them on the wheelchair, that's really not something that you can do. That is a reportable event.
Thank you, Tracy. And it
Right?
does. And I'm really
Absolutely.
glad you joined us today.
I am too. So sorry I was late to the party.
No, not a problem. It's good to see your face. Skyland, the next question kind of goes back to that group you just answered about insurance. And it asks, where does Health Springs Insurance go to?
I don't know anything about health spring insurance. Again, what I would encourage you to do is to look at the person's ISP, the individual support plan, or the PCSP, because the information that you need to know is included in that plan. So you're going to know which supports the person receives based on their support plan. I know that all of the support plans have for choices and ECF, it has the group that the services are provided in, that they're enrolled in, ECF or choices, it tells you the group, and then it's also going to tell you which MCO they are with. I'm pretty sure I've been out of the ISP development world for a while, but I'm pretty sure it's still in there as well. So please do reference those documents. Again, if you have questions, follow up with the case managers for the people who are writing those plans, and they would be able to also provide you with the information.
Thank you, Skyland. The next question is from Stephanie. And Stephanie, this question falls a little bit outside of the REM world. It's regarding AOD notifications. So what we will do is we will take that question away and bring it more into our program ops world, and we will get an answer to that question and respond back. All right, I don't see any other questions, and we'll just give it maybe 30 seconds, and then if we don't see any, we'll give you guys some time back in your day. Okay, well, we appreciate all the panelists being here and our special guest today to help with the dignity of choice. And we'd like to, it was nice seeing some old friends back. If anyone has any, oh, I'm sorry, we have one quick question. Well, I think it's ICF ISPs are not written by third party. Is the MCO Blue Care? I think, again, that goes back, Skyland, to you need to look at the individual person's plan, or their ISP or their PCSP, and that should list their MCO, or you look to see their insurance card or the PCSP. And the TennCare insurance, that would be the MCO, yes. So you would look to see on their insurance card which MCO was listed, and that would be where you would also send the ref to besides DIDD. So you're welcome. And with that, we wish you all the best and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks. Take care.